Well, welcome everyone to today's BREEDPLAN webinar on collecting data, the first one. So my name is Gudex. I'm a member of the Extension Engagement team here at ABRI in Australia. Does say Australia, but some of you may also notice that there's a slight Kiwi accent coming through, and I hope it's more than slight. I keep reminding the Australians they don't speak correctly, but it doesn't seem to work. I'm joined today by Catriona Millen, whom you will have an Australian accent, and Catriona will do the most of the presentation today. So she's our team leader in the Extension Engagement team. And this is, as I mentioned, the second of our BREEDPLAN webinars that we're doing every fortnight. So this is the first of the collecting data for BREEDPLAN ones. We have noticed with the people who have signed up that the first four are quite well subscribed, and we're wondering if some people didn't scroll down far enough to see that there's two more at the end there when they signed up. So you can sign up for them anytime. So just an advisory on that. And we've also got some housekeeping as well. So just so we don't get any feedback through the system, please ensure your microphone's on mute. We are recording it, so anyone can. So all registrants will be provided with a link. So if you want to go back and revisit some of the information presented, you will be able to do that. And please feel free to ask questions as you go through. So there's a raise hand button at the bottom of Zoom where you can raise your hand if you want to ask it and unmute and ask it when we come to a stop. Or you can go into the chat function and just type your question there and we can do it from there. So I think that's the end of the housekeeping. So I shall pass it over to Catriona and yeah, hopefully you get something out of this.
Thanks, Boyd. So today what we're going to do is talk about performance recording for BREEDPLAN, and I'm going to cover some of the more commonly recorded on farm traits that we have. I'm going to talk about carcass, net feed intake, fertility and structural traits in more detail in webinar 3. So today we're going to focus on things like recording growth traits, ultrasound scanning, scrotal size, those sorts of traits, and we'll talk about some of the traits that aren't so commonly recorded next time. I'm also going to talk about management groups, when you should supply them. We'll finish with some tips and tricks and then just quickly cover data submission. Okay, so as we talked about last week, last webinar, BREEDPLAN produces EBVs for a range of economically important traits, and we can see they're split into growth traits, fertility and calving, carcass, and other. And BREEDPLAN is a multi-trait analysis, so that means that all of our quantitative traits are analysed together in a analysis. So the growth traits, carcass traits, fertility traits, they're all analysed together. The only exception to that is our qualitative traits. So we have a calving ease analysis that is analysed alongside birth weight and gestation length, and then also a docility analysis. Those are done separately. An advantage of that is that multi-trait analysis allows for the relationships between different traits to be accounted for, and we know that there are relationships between traits. Traits are correlated together. They'll be correlated together positively or negatively, so as one goes up, one goes down. They are correlated, there is relationships there. And so that means that when you collect performance information for one trait, it can and it will influence the EBVs for other correlated traits. And so that's one reason why sometimes you'll see an animal that has multiple EBVs, even though only one trait has been recorded, because one trait that's been recorded is providing information for a range of other traits. So how do we calculate EBVs? Those EBVs are calculated from pedigree and performance information, or phenotypes, that are supplied by breeders usually but not always seed stock, using BREEDPLAN technology. And more recently, DNA information has been used in some analyses alongside pedigree and performance data to calculate EBVs. So for those of you that have single-step BREEDPLAN evaluations, we've got three sources of information. We've got our pedigree, our performance, and DNA. For those of you who have the traditional BREEDPLAN analyses without genomics at this stage, we're using pedigree and performance data. And that performance data is not just on an individual animal. The performance data on the individual animal plus all of its relatives will contribute to an animal EBVs. So when we think about performance recording, BREEDPLAN, or we here at ABRI, don't have a requirement for you to collect performance data for all BREEDPLAN traits. You can choose which traits you would like to record. What we do recommend, however, is that if a trait is important to your breeding objective, and we talked a little last week about how you can put particular emphasis on EBVs that are of importance to your breeding program, whether or not that's a growth trait, a carcass trait, fertility trait, or a combination. If those traits are important to your breeding objectives or your client's breeding objectives, then we strongly recommend that you record those traits, because an EBV is always more accurate if the trait in question is recorded directly rather than just relying on correlated data. So if it's important to you, please record it. So when we think about performance recording, we've just pulled up some of the different types of data we can get here, and you'll see that there's different age ranges and equipment required. So birth weights and live weights, we use scales, ultrasound scan data to get a feel of carcass information on the live animal. We get an accredited technician. Scrotal circumference, we require a measurement tape. Docility scores, either in a crush or small yards. Flight time, which I'm not sure that many of you will be recording. Here in Australia, we have two measures of temperament that the different breeds use. Docility score is mostly used by our Bos Taurus, so our British and Euro breeds here in Australia, whereas flight time is typically used by our Bos Indicus breeds and their composites such as Brahman up in the northern parts of Australia. So I'm not going to talk about flight time in detail in this presentation, but if it is a trait that you are recording, there is a tip sheet available on the website, or please feel free to reach out for further information and we can provide that. And we'll talk about structural soundness next time, but that is a trait that requires usually an accredited scorer to score the animals for structure. So when we think about performance recording, one thing I like to do is look at our performance recording timeline. And I think this is really helpful because it breaks the recording and which traits you can collect down into the life stages of an animal, which is often when you're doing other husbandry practices as well. Because when we think about performance recording, we don't want to make it more difficult for you. We want you to be doing performance recording when you're getting the cattle into the yards anyway and doing handling. So it's broken into joining, birth, weaning, yearling, 18 months, and then maturity. And so what you can see is that we've got joining, we've got mate program details, AI dates, and preg test results. At birth, that's when we collect our date of birth, birth weight, calving difficulty score, and recip dam details. At weaning, or around weaning, we can do our 200-day weight, mature cow weight on the cows, and then our temperament score, whether or not that's docility or flight time. At yearling, that's when we recommend doing your 400-day weight and scrotal circumference measurements on the male calves. 18 months is a 600-day weight, and then somewhere between yearling and 18 months is when we get things like our scanning measurements, avatar carcass data, structural score information, and bull soundness information. And then at maturity, that's when we can put our cow disposal codes in, which is related to our mating program information, and mature cow weight, which, as I said, we collect on the mature cows when their calves are being weaned. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of those life stages in a little bit more detail and talk through how we do those traits. So joining. This is when we can collect our AI data, which we use to calculate gestation length EBVs. And that's used alongside calf date of birth to give us what the gestation length was. So we don't require you to put in a gestation length. The BREEDPLAN software will calculate the gestation length itself using the AI date and the date of birth of the calf. And that is supplied to your breed society when you are registering your AI calves. It's also when we can collect mating program details, which is for our days to calving information and our days to calving EBVs. So those are calculated from joining records of both heifers and older cows, and that is our main female fertility EBV that we have in BREEDPLAN. So we need key pieces of information to do that, and as I said, we'll cover this in more detail next time, but just briefly today, what we need are joining details of all females that were naturally mated within the herd, details of all females that were removed from the herd, particularly those that were there at joining but not at calving, and then details of all calves, whether or not they were dead or alive, born as a result of those joinings. And that's important because if we don't have that dead calf on file with your breed society, then the analysis will assume that she didn't calve. So dead calves, even though we're not interested in their information for themselves, as we'll see throughout today, the information we get on dead calves is informative for their relatives. And so optionally, you can also submit your preg test results if you are preg testing, and then AI and ET program details can also be submitted. We're not currently using those in the days to calving analysis, but it is possible to submit them as well. Our research scientists team at the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit are currently working on a way to get AI records into our days to calving information calculations. And so in order for them to do that, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation where we need to have the AI records come in so that they can look at how they can, if they can fit them into the analysis. Okay, our next life stage is birth. So this is when we record our date of birth. We need that to register our calf. It's really important for BREEDPLAN contemporary group formation, so how we decide which calves should be compared head to head and which shouldn't. There is a seasonality effect that we apply across there, so we need to know when they were born. And as I mentioned earlier, it's quite important also for calculating our gestation length EBV for those AI calves, because that way we can, the system can work out what the gestation length was. It's also when we can record our recip dam information. So that's obviously important for our ET calves only. But once again, that's really important for BREEDPLAN contemporary group formation, because if we think about recip cows, we know that the maternal contribution that a beef breed makes to her calf's growth, for example, is quite different to the contributions that a dairy cow would make to her calf's growth. There's obviously going to be a difference in milk as one example, and so BREEDPLAN needs to know what is the breed of the ET recip and what is the calving year, so that we can get a feel for how old she is and fit our age effects. When we are thinking about recip dams, for those of you that are doing ET programs, where possible, it's really good to use animals or recips all of the same breed. That just stops us separating them because of different breed effects. So if you can use recips that are all the one breed, that's really fantastic. And also, where possible, if you've got ex-stud cows that have gone out into a commercial herd, for example, ex-stud cows are also really useful as recips in terms of what we know about them from their previous performance and their pedigree and things like that. So wherever possible, we really do recommend avoiding what we call licorice all sorts and trying to have just a single breed that you use for your recips. Okay, our next trait that we collect at birth is our birth weight, and that's used to calculate our birth weight EBVs. So there's a range of different options that you can use. I'm just going to run through some of them now. So sling and clock face scales, like you see here, where you wrap them around the calf and lift them up and get a reading of its weight. Platform scales, which here in Australia we would connect to the side of a ute or a quad bike. I'm not sure what you call them in UK and Europe, but certainly for us on the side of a farm vehicle that you can drive around the paddocks or fields. Also commercial calf cradles like the one you see here attached to the front of the quad bike. And we've seen these come into Australia in the last, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years. These are calf catchers with scales, and these are where you essentially capture the calf in a little mobile pen and record it in there. And there's an obvious advantage there in that you have a bit more protection from a protective mother. They work quite well on flat land, so we're told. Our friends across the ditch in New Zealand tell me that they really don't work well on steep hills. So depending on your country type, they are an option. But there are also plenty of producers that just use bathroom scales. So there is nothing wrong with you standing on a scales and getting your weight, picking the calf up and getting a combined weight, and then working out the difference in order to work out the calf's weight. That's a perfectly legitimate tool. That's a way a lot of producers in Australia will collect birth weights. You're fine to do that. If you've only got a bathroom scales, please feel free to use that to weigh your calves. So when we think about our tips, calves should be recorded within 24 hours of birth. If you are checking them at least once a day, that should enable you to get them before they're older than 24 hours. It's really important that we record birth weight for all calves, including those dead calves. That's, as I said before, while we're not interested in what the birth weight EBV is for a dead calf, dead calves are particularly informative for relatives, so the sire and the dam, particularly if they're dead because they were quite large calves. So that information is still really useful to the BREEDPLAN analysis. Our best practice is that we recommend that you weigh the calves rather than use a coronet band or girth tape. We've found in studies here in Australia that the coronet bands don't do a particularly good job at the extremes of the range. They do a pretty good job in the middle, but if we look at calves on the heavier end, they tend to underestimate, and if we look at calves on the lighter end, they tend to overestimate. So we're not getting a good representation at those extremes, and so for that reason, wherever possible, we do recommend that those calves are weighed rather than using a coronet band. And lastly, we do like birth weights, but we don't like birth weights when you've been bowled over by protective mothers. So please be careful. Your safety always comes first. And then the last trait that we can collect at birth is our calving ease scores. So we use these to calculate our calving ease EBVs alongside the birth weight and gestation length information. And they're recorded using a 1 to 6 scale, which you can see on the screen here. So 1 is unassisted, and that means that she calved unassisted with no difficulty. If you are checking your cows or your heifers at least once a day, you can assume that anything that calved between visits, calved unassisted, that's fine. 2 is an easy pull, so one person without mechanical assistance. 3 is a hard pull, so either 2 people without mechanical assistance, or if you've had to use mechanical assistance. 4 is surgical assistance, where you've needed a vet to come out and assist the calf. 5 is a malpresentation, so a breech, for example, and then 6 is elective surgery, which is surgical removal of the calf before the cow has had the opportunity to calve. So in terms of tips, once again, record all calves, including the dead calves. Those dead calves, if they've been assisted, particularly those that have been assisted, are very valuable for informing, once again, back to the the parents and other relatives. And then if you don't put a calving difficulty score in and you just leave it as blank, that won't be interpreted as unassisted. That will be interpreted as no score. So if they are unassisted, make sure you put score 1 in there when you're submitting it, your rego details. That way they will be on file with a calving e-score. All right, our next life stage is weaning. So this is when we can record our 200-day weights. Now, in terms of our live weights, those are used to calculate our 200, our 400 and our 600-day weights, as well as our milk EBVs. And those live weights are actually collected on animals aged between 80 and 900 days of age. And you'll see here that we have some age ranges for the different traits. So 200-day weight can be collected on animals that are 80 to 300 days of age. 400-day weights, they're 301 to 500 days of age, and 600, they're 501 to 900 days of age. Now, we don't want you to worry too much about this. It is ideal to do them when they're around 200, 400 and 600 days of age, but there is a range there. And if you're close to the edge of that range, so for example, they're ranging from 290 to 310 days of age when you record them, BREEDPLAN will actually work out should it be treated as a 200-day weight or a 400-day weight. So ideally, aim at around that time in their life when they are 200 days, but just be aware that BREEDPLAN will actually look at the group, work out the average age and treat it as a 200 or a 400-day weight accordingly. So our live weights are taken using scales, recorded to the nearest kilogram, and you can take up to 2 weights for each of 200, 400 and 600-day weights. And that just gives the BREEDPLAN analysis a little bit more information on each of those animals. But if you are doing that, what we're really interested in BREEDPLAN is the variation between animals and how they rank. So if you are going to take 200-day weights, for example, we would recommend that you wait at least a month between them, because a weight taken today and a weight taken tomorrow are not particularly informative, whereas if we've got some time between the 2 weights, animals may re-rank, they'll grow at different rates. That's going to give us more informative information for the BREEDPLAN analysis. And in terms of 200-day weights, taking 200-day weights can be particularly useful for calculating our milk EBVs, which is our EBV for maternal contribution to growth of the calf. Sometimes we've got some breeders here in Australia that are a bit concerned that their cows might have dried off by the time they get to weaning. So you are welcome, if you're concerned about that. You, for example, may like to take a first weight at around 150 days and then another one at 200 days just to get a weight, the first weight, when those calves are still all drinking off mum. So that's perfectly legitimate. We do recommend it is done around weaning, but you don't have to do it on the day of weaning. Around weaning is just because that's often when you have the calves in the yards anyway. And then when we're taking 200-day weights on our calves, this is also a good opportunity to record mature cow weights. So these must be collected within 2 weeks of the cow's calf having a 200-day weight recorded. And we can analyse up to 4 mature cow weights per cow. The first needs to be taken before she is 6 years of age. And so that often means, for those of you that are calving down at 2-year-old, that the first one is taken when she's 2 and a bit, 3 and a bit, 4 and a bit, and 5 and a bit. But if you decided this year to take mature cow weights for the first time and your cow was aged 5, then we would be able to use the mature cow weight when she's 5, 6, 7, and 8. So they can be older than 6 years when we use a valid mature cow weight, but the first one has to be taken before she's 6. So best practice is to aim to weigh the cows on the same day that you collect 200-day weights on their calves, so run them through the scales at the same time. And also, because we don't want you because we don't want you standing there in the yards trying to work out how old's this cow, has she had, how many mature cow weights has she had. What we recommend you do is just run all of your cows and all of your first calf heifers over the scales, send them in, and let the breed plan analysis work out which we can analyse and which we can't. And that will save you your time trying to draft cows and heifers. Okay, this is also a good time to calculate our record our docility scores, which we use to calculate our docility EBVs. These need to be collected when the calves are aged between 60 and 400 days of age. And we've got two methods. The first of these is a yard test, and so in this instance, as you can see on the screen here, the calves are individually held in a small square pen, and you, or the handler, attempts to hold the animal in the corner for approximately 30 seconds. Option 2 is a crush test, where you put the calves up the race and then hold them individually in the crush for about 30 seconds. So either of those methods are perfectly legit. If you are recording docility score, you can use whichever of those works best for you. This is our standard breed plan scoring system. I am aware that some societies record these differently, but I'm just going to take you through the breed plan scale. If your society has a different scoring system for docility, then please check with them what their scoring system is. But for breed plan purposes, our standard scale is 1 through to 5. 1, where the animal is docile, 2, restless, 3, nervous, 4, flighty, and 5, aggressive. And the person you saw on the previous slide here holding the calf in the pen is our previous Extension Manager, Alex McDonald, who used to work for Australian Limousin, which were one of the breeds, I think potentially the first breed to introduce a docility EBV in Australia. And Alex used to say that if he was in the yard, his scoring method was if you could hold it in the corner and put the stick on it, 1, just off, 2, standing in the middle, 3, if it was running around you, 4, and if you jumped out of the pen, it was a 5. So that was his yard scoring methodology. So in terms of tips, we need to specify whether or not you've used a crush or a yard test when you're submitting your docility scores. I will talk about the paper forms and Excel, etc., that we can use to submit performance information a little bit later, but there will be a space if you've got a docility score column. There's also a space to indicate what your test type was. We can accept half scores, so that's particularly useful for animals that are sitting somewhere between, say, 1 and 2. You're not sure which one it is, 1.5. And that's particularly useful because we do need variation in this trait to be able to analyse it. Like all traits, we're looking for the variation that exists between animals. So having those half scores is a good opportunity to differentiate animals that are particularly docile and those that are not quite docile but not quite restless, for example. Ideally, what we're trying to do with these temperament EBVs is pick up their natural temperament before they've been quietened down through too much handling. So ideally, we would aim to collect our docility scores prior to animals receiving significant handling. It's really important that we use a consistent scoring method. So that means that ideally the same person should be scoring all calves in the mob, because even though it's a scale, we know that we've all got an individual interpretation of that. That's fine when within a contemporary group, animals are all scored by the one person, but we don't, for example, want someone on farm scoring half the calves and then someone else taking over halfway through. And in terms of consistent scoring method, that's not just about the person that is scoring the calves. That's also thinking about who you've got moving animals up into the crush, for example, or moving animals into the yard. So ideally, all of the staff or all of the people that are collecting those records and moving animals through yards, they all remain the same while we're recording a cohort. And I know that this should be obvious, but I did have a problem with this with one of our herds over here. They gave their calves vaccinations in the crush and then observed their behaviour, and we had a lot of score 3 and score 4 animals, whereas in reality we expect we're going to see mostly quiet animals. And when I went down and had a chat to them and we were trying to work out what was going on, the problem was that they'd vaccinated first. So please collect docility scores prior to doing any other husbandry practices on those calves. Okay, yearling is our next life stage. So this is when we recommend taking your 400-day weights. Once again, live weights, run them over the scales and collect in kilograms. You can take, as is the case with 200-day weights, you can take up to 2 400-day weights. If you are going to do that, please make sure that there's a good period of time between those two weights. And this is also when we recommend that you take your scrotal circumference measurements. So these are used to calculate our scrotal size EBVs, and they are collected on bulls aged 300 to 700 days of age. So the reason we recommend doing this at around yearling is because what we're really trying to do is get a feel of the difference in puberty. We're not just interested in scrotal size or scrotal circumference as a trait. It's actually trying to collect the differences in puberty in those animals. And so what we're aiming to do is have some bulls that haven't been through puberty, some that are going through puberty, and some that are pubertal already. And so in most Bos Taurus breeds, around yearling works. For our Bos Indicus breeds, if there is anyone on with a Bos Indicus breed type, that is often a little bit later. So just trying to get them going through that puberty change. We really recommend that you use a self-tensioning scrotal measurement tape. So you can see on the screen, this is a reliable tape. And the reason we like those self-tensioning tapes is that it means that equal pressure is applied to each bull. Whereas if you're using a cloth tape, for example, or even a metal tape, you can pull them tighter on one bull compared to another, and so that's going to give us differences just by the tension. A self-tensioning tape, it will, when you put it on and pull it tight, it will click when it gets to a certain tension, and it'll do that equally for each bull. So we do recommend the reliable tape. Certainly here in Australia, they are available from farm stores and from online farm stores as well. I would recommend that you do head to your local farm store if you are interested in finding a self-tensioning tape and see whether or not they stock something similar or the reliable tape. This is a common misconception. Scrotal circumference measurements can be taken by anyone. So you can record scrotal circumference measurements on your own bulls. That's fine. You don't need an accredited technician. You don't need a vet. And in terms of technique, when you're doing that, it's really important that you watch your thumbs because we want to avoid separating the cords. So ideally, you're going to hold the testes, measure around the widest point, and that will be your measurement, grasping from the side, not thumb in the middle, separating the cords.
We've actually had a question on scrotal circumference, Catriona, asking if it is possible to have two scrotal circumference measures from the same bull that were measured on two different farms within the 300 to 700 day age range.
Yeah, so we're only going to analyse the first one. At this stage, BREEDPLAN will only analyse one scrotal circumference measurement per bull, so we would take the first valid one. There's nothing to stop you putting it on file if you have got two. We're just not going to use both of them.
Yeah, and there is also an aspect there on this one as well on the because there was two farms involved, so obviously the bull has moved from one farm to another. That's going to affect its management grouping, which Catriona will be talking about later in this presentation as well. And I have been trying to keep up with Portuguese to English translations on Google, and thanks, Paolo, you've been on the mark. And for for the original question, who missed the first webinar, that will be, Catriona will be sending it around, or we can make sure it goes around to you at some stage as well. So yeah, we will be doing that.
It's been sent around to everyone who registered, but if you missed that webinar, I think we'll get a transcript of the chat afterwards, and we can double check that that person's email has been sent a copy. Okay, if there's no more questions, I will move on. Okay, our last life stage that I wanted to talk about was 18 months to rising 2-year-old. So once again, this slide is probably starting to look a bit familiar. We can take our 600-day weights, so live weights, aim to do them around 600 days of age, but they can be done anywhere from 501 to 900 days of age. And you can take, once again, no surprises, 2 weights of each type. So you can take 2 600-day weights, but make sure there's some space between them. The one thing I did want to talk about with 600-day weights is the fact that you can take live weights on pregnant heifers. So I think this is a bit of a misconception as well. We often, when we sit down with a producer one-on-one and have a chat about why they may not be doing 600-day weights, they say to us, oh, I'm carving down heifers as just over 2-year-old, and mating, carving down, just over 2-year-old, they're pregnant, I don't want to take 600-day weights. So you can take live weights on pregnant heifers. Where possible, we recommend that they are recorded before they are more than 3 to 4 months pregnant, because at that stage, a fetus isn't going to have a large impact on their live weight. So where you can, please measure them early, and that can be from 501 days onwards. So you can bring them back, you don't have to wait to 600 days, bring them back and do them at 550 days if that's going to fit in with how pregnant, trying to get them done before they're more than 3 to 4 months pregnant. However, you can do them if they are greater than 3 to 4 months pregnant, but if you are doing that, we would only recommend you do that if you are preg testing those heifers so that you know which have preg tested in calf and which are empty. And after 3 to 4 months, that fetus is going to have an impact on their weight. So we would say to you, yes, you can do that, but please make sure those that are preg tested in calf are in a separate management group to those that have been tested empty. And furthermore, depending on how tight your mating period is, if you have preg tested in calf and they're 5 months, 6 months versus 7 months, they should all be placed in separate management groups as well. We don't want heifers that are 5 months pregnant in the same group with heifers that are 7 months pregnant because of the impact of the fetus. So that's why ideally try and do them before they're more than 3 to 4 months pregnant, but you can do it afterwards. There's just some conditions around trying to make sure that you have preg tested and you've management grouped appropriately. Okay, 18 months to 2-year-old is also when we do our ultrasound scan data, and we use these to calculate our carcass EBVs, and those are collected on animals aged between 300 and 800 days. Most people, at least here in Australia, do them as rising 2-year-olds. We can only analyse one set of ultrasound scan data per animal. So often we will see people will get a scanner out to do everything, and then also get the animals rescanned at the point of sale for information for their sale catalogues. We're only going to analyse the first set of data that we receive. You need to use a BREEDPLAN accredited scanner. Off the top of my head, I think there's 7 or 8 accredited scanners in the UK. They are spread throughout Scotland, England, I think there's someone in Wales, and both Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. So you have a range of scanners available. Contact details are on the BREEDPLAN website. When you are scanning, condition of stock should be the most important consideration when deciding should you be scanning. What we are ideally after is a minimum 5 mil, I think it is, rump fat and 3 mil rib fat as a minimum. And we also want those animals to have been on a rising plane of nutrition. That may not be such a problem across in the UK and Europe, but certainly here for us, if we've gone through a drought period, for example, and animals have had limited feed and then come out and had good feed, we don't want to be scanning them. We want them to have been on a nice, even rising plane of nutrition ahead of scanning. Thank you, Boyd. Boyd's just put the list of UK scanners in the chat for everyone. So we want rising plane of nutrition, minimum fat depths to optimise our scanning information, but your scanner should tell you if those animals are too skinny when they are being scanned. And that's typically more of a problem where people are trying to do them really young. So, for example, we have people here in Australia that are trying to do them ahead of yearling sales, and those animals just don't have enough fat on them to get good variation in the animals. We've just had a question come in about the southwest of England, and they are scanning ourselves and sending scans to CUP labs in America. Would it be possible? Yes. That we have some CUP accredited scanners here in Australia and also across in New Zealand. So long as you have been through the CUP accreditation process, they say, I think they have a process where they say, yes, you're good to send data into the CUP labs. Our take has always been, in that case, yes, CUP's accredited you, we're happy to use it. But any issues with that, Maddie, please get in contact. But that's my current understanding of how we're handling the CUP labs and accreditation process. So condition of stock is really important. And the other thing I wanted to say was ultrasound scan data for heifers is really valuable to the BREEDPLAN analysis. So as I've said a few times today, we are particularly interested in variation between animals. And so heifers are valuable because compared to bulls of the same age, they have typically laid down more fat, which means we typically see more variation in the heifers than we do in bulls of the same age. And furthermore, often people have put some selection pressure on the bulls in terms of which ones they're retaining as bulls. They've already castrated a number of animals and made some selection decisions. While there is selection pressure put on heifers, often it's not as severe as the selection pressure that is put on young bulls. And so often the heifers will represent a bigger cross-section of your herd than your bull calves do, particularly if you've culled heavily among the bull calves. And that is valuable because, yes, we're interested in the heifers' scan data, but it will also inform their parents, their brothers, etc. So heifers can be very, very valuable for us in the genetic evaluation. DNA. So producers can now take a sample from an animal and send it to a commercial genotyping lab for a DNA test. There are a couple of tissue types or sample types that are commonly collected. We're seeing tissues taken by a tissue sampling unit or an earplug sample, a TSU, used quite often here in Australia. That's often done in conjunction with calf tagging. The pro is it can be collected from birth. The con is that we need that specialised applicator that you can see in the picture here, and also requires the purchase of TSU tubes. Another common sample type we're seeing is hair. You pull approximately 40 hairs from the tail switch. They need to be pulled, not cut, because the DNA is actually in the root follicle, which you can see at the top of the hair sample here. The advantage of those is that they are suitable for long-term storage at home at room temperature. The con is that the genotyping labs are recommending that you don't collect them on calves younger than 60 days of age, so they're not recommending they're taken at birth just because of the hair follicle development. I am aware that some producers take them at birth and don't have problems, but that is not what the lab is recommending, and there can be problems with not getting sufficient DNA samples. And then the third type we see commonly used is our semen through a semen straw. That can be used. The advantage of that is we can often get semen samples on when the physical animal is unavailable. So it might be an overseas bull that you've brought in as AI straws, for example, or it might be deceased. The downside is that's only applicable for mature bulls. So 3 sample types that are commonly used. And then we can use, for those of you that have single-step breed plan, we can use the DNA information alongside pedigree and performance to calculate breed plan EBVs. So in terms of DNA testing, when you do your DNA testing is up to you. It will depend in part on the tissue or the sample type that you're collecting, but we would recommend that you contact your breed society or your genotyping lab for details of what if they have a preferential sampling. Some of the labs here in Australia, for example, are preferring TSUs and have a surcharge for other tissue types. Some of the labs don't. So contact Breed Society, see what the preferred sample type is and what the collection protocol recommended by the lab is. In terms of tips, we really do recommend collecting a DNA sample early in an animal's life if you would like to include it in the genetic evaluation. Genomics can have quite an influence on EBVs, and so our scientists up at ABRI are recommending that the genomics comes in early, goes into the analysis. That will give you a feel for where it's going to sit from its genomic sample, and then the performance data will adjust it up and down as we get that information come in. So where possible, get it into the analysis nice and early. We recommend sending your sample for processing well in advance of when you require your EBVs for selection or sale purposes. There is a lag time. You need to get the sample from your farm to the lab. Whether or not that's via the Breed Society will depend on the Breed Society protocol. Then it needs to be sampled in the lab. Then it needs to come back, be uploaded onto the database, and then for those breeds that are having a monthly breed plan evaluation, it has to wait for the next breed plan evaluation. So usually 3 to 4 months is adequate, but there are instances where the sample needs to be recollected and we need to, for example, they may not have got sufficient DNA out of it. So there's a recollection process and you need to repeat. So in that case, we recommend to allow yourself enough time for any repeat sampling that you get your DNA samples collected at least 6 months in advance of your deadline for when you want to use the EBVs for your sale catalogues or for your heifer selection, for example. And we also recommend, where possible, that you consider doing long-term home storage of samples for DNA testing purposes. Now, that may be so that you can retest current animals. Our previous colleague, Paul Williams, lived up in Queensland where producers usually have large, expansive production systems. He likes to tell the story of a producer who collected samples, put all the animals back out into the paddock. It was I think it was at least a 5,000 acre, possibly bigger paddock. Sent all the samples off to the lab, and there was one bull that they had to retest, and they had to go back out, remuster, and pull another sample. So we really recommend taking a hair sample when you are, even if you're using a TSU, pull a backup hair sample so that you don't have to re-bring the cattle in if you are asked to get another sample of that current animal. It's also useful if you require down the track there may be another genetic condition discovered, or you might be asked to retest an animal for a particular reason. That allows you to have the sample there on file, ready to redo a test if needed, and also allows future testing of any animals that you haven't tested if you decide that that's the way you want to go. So when you're storing hair samples at home, which is what we recommend, TSUs aren't stable at room temperature for long time periods at this stage. We would recommend hair samples for long-term storage go into a paper envelope rather than a plastic one, because plastic will sweat and the samples will go mouldy. And you want to keep them fairly stable. Put them in a paper envelope, label the envelope, put them in a cupboard somewhere, and keep them nice and temperature stable. Have we had any other questions come in, Boyd?
Nope.
Okay. We might be pushing tips and tricks. I just looked at the time. So contemporary groups and genetic linkage are how BREEDPLAN compares animals. Boyd talked about that last week. Contemporary groups, environmental effects are minimised by only directly comparing animals that have had equal opportunity to perform. So if we look at these animals here, we can see they're running in very different environments. We would not compare animals in this group to animals in this group because the environment is different. They haven't had equal opportunity to perform. So we use what we call contemporary groups to split animals into groups where they've had the same treatment to allow us to compare them validly head to head. So there's a range of automatic criteria. You can see them there. We've got herd, calving year, sex of calf, so we don't compare males and females, for example, for most traits. Number in birth, so we don't compare twins with singles. Birth status, so natural and AI born calves can be compared head to head, but we don't compare them with the ET calves. Dam age is used for our birth traits, so things like birth weight and calving ease. For everything else, we actually do a dam age adjustment. And then things like breed, measurement date, calf age, which is that seasonality I was talking about earlier. And then the last one there you'll notice is breeder-defined management groups. Now they're really important because we can't see what is going on in your fields. And so breeder-defined management groups really allow you to act as eyes for the BREEDPLAN analysis. So there's two types of management groups. The first is birth management groups, and that's for birth weight and calving ease traits supplied alongside those measurements. And really what we're doing there is allowing you to describe any difference in the treatment of the cows prior to the birth of their calves that may have impacted the calves' performance, especially any differences that occurred in the last trimester. So common examples are cows in different fields. If you have got cows in one field over here and then cows on agistment on a different property, they're running under different environmental conditions. They should be split into, their calves when they're born should be split into two different groups in terms of management grouping. Individual calf being preemie is also often a management group for birth traits, or for example if the dam was sick prior to calving. Our post-birth management groups allow you to identify animals that have received different treatment or management following birth that may have influenced their performance. So common examples, an animal has been sick or injured and that's affected its performance. Different feeding regimes. Now, that could be that some of the animals are on supplementary feed and some are not, so that's a different feeding regime. They should be put into separate groups. But depending on your field layout and your farm layout, potentially, if they are in different fields with different nutritional value, then we really should be splitting them into two groups. We do allow breeder discretion. So if you've got calves in two fields, sorry, I'm saying paddocks in my head and translating. If you have two different fields side by side, and the feed levels are similar, the nutritional value is similar, that's fine. They don't have to be split into two groups. But if you had one field on this side of your farm and one field on the other side of your farm, and there's a big distance between them, those are separate groups. So there is some discretion there. It's really a judgment call on your part. Are the calves being exposed to the same level of feed? And then our third example is when you have some yearling bulls that are used for mating, but others are not. Those that are used for mating should be in a different group to those that have not been used for mating. So sometimes it's tricky, sometimes it's quite clear-cut, sometimes it's tricky. If you're not sure, please reach out to your BREEDPLAN processing centre where you send your BREEDPLAN data and ask them for their advice, because and if they're not sure, they'll come back to the team here at ABRI as well. We're certainly happy to chat through situations with people. We want to get it right. We want to help you get it right. So if you're not sure in the first instance, please reach out to your BREEDPLAN processing centre and they will assist you, because it's sometimes tricky. Twins are tricky, foster calves are tricky, all sorts of things can happen. There's just been a question coming in on rotating every year a group of cows on the different fields. That's fine. It's more about if you've got a calving drop this year and they are in separate paddocks. If you have a calving drop this year that's in paddock A, and then next year the next year's calving drop ends up in paddock B, that's fine, because we don't compare the calves that were born this year directly with the calves that were born next year. I think that's answered the question. If it hasn't, please re-type it and I'll have another go. Okay, so management groups are supplied alongside performance data. This is an example of our Excel template, and you can see here that we've got herd ident, animal ident, room for the weight and the weigh date, and then this management group column. So you will have an option to put a management group in alongside your performance data. And in terms of how you do that, you can use up to 3 characters. They can be numbers, letters, or a combination. Use whatever makes the most sense to you. I've seen plenty of people use A versus B versus C. I've seen people use 1 versus 2 versus 3. I've also seen people use field names. So, for example, I have paddocks here at home that are called Shed Paddock, Middle Dam. Whatever your paddock names are, you can use those if they make more sense. Or if you've got different properties, sometimes people will put, whatever property's 1 name is versus property 2's name. So options, whatever makes the most sense to you. And one thing to be aware of is that post-birth management groups will impact on the contemporary group formation for the trait that the management group applies to, and any future traits. So for example, here I've got 200-day weights, male calves. There's calves in management group A and management group B. So we've rightly split them into 2 different groups that won't be analysed head to head because the management has been different. However, if the breeder then sends us in 400-day weights and there is no management group, even though there's no management group, because they were split back here at 200 days, they're going to stay split at 400 days. So our advice is, if you do split animals into management groups, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do on farm, often you need to split mobs out, try and keep them in that management group. Don't, for example, muster them back together and then mix up management group A and management group B. Follow management B through as a group and management A through as a group wherever possible. And for further information, we do have some information on recording management groups. There's a tip sheet and also 2 videos that take you through some worked examples as well. Just looking at the time, I've got 2 more slides. We might go through these tips quite quickly, but given the time, we might put them in next time as well and spend a little bit more time talking on them. So I'll go through them quickly now, but we will go through them in more detail in a fortnight. So in terms of performance recording, where you can, ideally, try and restrict your calving periods. I talked about age seasonality before. We often apply a 45-day slice for 200-day weight and a 60-day age slice for 400 and 600-day weight. So you can keep those calving periods nice and tight. That helps with us not breaking them into into different contemporary groups due to age. Where possible, run all calves under the same management conditions. It's sometimes necessary to split them. If you do need to split them, try and split them on things like sex and management conditions. If they've been in different paddocks, follow them, as I said, with those groups through so that we're not splitting too often. Really important that we measure all animals in the mob for the same trait on the same day, because management group weigh date of an animal impacts how we form contemporary groups. So we want them all weighed on the same day. Sometimes we will have herds that run a stud herd alongside a commercial herd, and in some cases you're able to put those commercial animals on your breed society register. If that is the case, if you do have a small stud herd and then a larger commercial herd and you're recording all of them, that's an option to help boost the number of animals you have in a group for head-to-head comparison. And I just wanted to talk about associated herds as well. If you have this is often where you've got mum and dad have a farm or a property, and then the kid might, or the children might have one or two stud animals registered in their name, but they're all running head to head. So we've got two separate linked for performance purposes and get them associated so that the animals that the kids own are compared head to head with the animals that mum and dad own. So that's an option there as well. And as we talked about, really important to supply recipient dam details, particularly breed content and year of birth. And so there's no minimum herd size required. There's a whole range of factors that work on whether or not we can use information effectively. But as long as you've got a tight calving period and things are pretty consistent, animals are calving down at the same time of year, you're managing them same, etc., we can usually get a good sized contemporary group. As I said at the start, remember that we're not going to tell you have to record certain traits. You can choose to record as many traits as you like, but we do recommend if that trait's important to your breeding objective, then you should record it. Really important that we record the whole cohort, not just the best. I will put some slides in about this next time, but essentially we're interested in the difference between animals, and if we get rid of the bottom half, our average goes up, and we're doing a disservice to all of those animals, comparing them to an average that's not the whole mob. Submit management groups as appropriate. If you're not sure, please reach out and ask. Recommend you submit your performance data as soon as possible. You don't want to leave it on the dashboard of your farm vehicle and then be looking for it in 12 months' time. So try and get it in as soon as possible. And for those of you that have been performance recording but not members of BREEDPLAN, you can submit historic data. We would always recommend that you start with the most recent generation and move backwards, because the most recent animals are the most closely related to what you have on farm currently. Submitting data. All pedigree and performance data is submitted via your BREEDPLAN processing centre, which is usually your breed society. There's one database. It contains all of the pedigree information and the performance data, and usually you can do your birth traits at calf rego and then the rest of the traits as you record them. You've got 4 submission pathways. BREEDPLAN paper performance forms. These are our least preferred method, just because there's often issues with handwriting. When I processed BREEDPLAN data many years ago, 10 years ago, there were instances I would ring a producer up and say, what number is this? Because I couldn't read it. So for eliminating double processing and for issues with interpreting handwriting, not our favourite method. BREEDPLAN Excel templates are available. You can download those from the Help Centre on the BREEDPLAN website. There's also BREEDPLAN compatible herd recording software. ABRI owns Herdmaster, which is one option here in Australia. There's also Stockbook, and I believe there's and the Cool software technology. I believe there's some UK specific ones. I apologise for not knowing what they are, but I understand there's a few more options in the UK. And then lastly, you can, depending on your Breed Society website, there's often a web services area where you can submit that data online. For further information on that, we do have a short video, which you can find on the Help Centre. And for further information, we do recommend the Recording Performance Information booklet. It contains tip sheets on all of the traits to record for BREEDPLAN, the timeline, how to submit information, and other performance recording considerations, which might be the one that might be of interest to those of you in Portugal, includes our record performance information during drought conditions. So all of that is available online on the BREEDPLAN website. Thank you, Boyd, for putting links into the chat for me. Okay, did we have any final questions? Sorry to run a little bit over time.
We certainly do. We've had a question, what is the impact of yearling size compared to older size? I would expect their genetics is the same as nothing else is transmitted. I can handle it if you want.
Yeah, I'm trying. So I would say that yearling size compared to older size, if the breeder is making progress, yearling size should have better genetics than the older sires because they're younger, they're another generation. That is the advantage of using young bulls. Often why people are doing it. Boyd, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so if their EBVs are the same, then they're the same because their genetics are set at the moment the animal's actually conceived and doesn't change according to their age. But what can change according to age, of course, is the EBV accuracy. As more data comes on, and there's more likely an old animal will have more data than a younger animal, they will have more accurate EBVs. So that is what will change there.
Yeah, so I guess it's a trade-off between potentially making faster genetic gain because the animals are younger and a generation ahead, versus, as Boyd said, the accuracy with older animals, and there is a balancing act to be had there related to the management groups of cows. Oh, when I said potentially when I said that if yearling bulls had been used to work and others had not, what I was trying to say there, sorry, we've gone off on a tangent. What I was trying to say there was if you have a group of yearling bulls and some of them are being used for mating, but others are not, so they're just sitting in the paddock, the ones that are in the paddock can put all of their energy into growing, whereas those that are being used for work are working, they're going to potentially lose conditions. So we don't want to compare a yearling bull that's worked with a yearling bull that hasn't worked because there's going to be environmental differences that will impact their growth and their traits. That was, yeah, sorry for the confusion. That was what I meant when I was talking about yearling bulls going into separate management groups.
Yep, we've got one. If NA animal has only DNA testing without any registered data, will the animal show EBVs? I guess, it might have been any. If an animal, sorry. Do you want to handle that or do you want me, Catriona? So if an animal has been registered and is on the database and receives and you put a DNA sample in with it, but you haven't submitted any trait data, it can depend, but it should end up where we have a minimum accuracy level for reporting EBVs. If that animal doesn't fail any quality control on its DNA, it will end up showing EBVs is the short answer. Sorry, that was probably a long way to get to that, answering that.
I've just put the feedback survey up if people wouldn't mind doing that. And then I think the last question to come in was if a person is accredited by the CUP Lab. I think if it's the CUP Lab, yes. If it's a different lab, Paulo will have to talk about that separately. So I will follow up on that one.
We also had a bit of a discussion earlier on, we had the question of why don't we compare ET carbs against AI carbs? Is it because the influence of the receptor cow? That is one of the reasons, yes. As Catriona said, a dairy cow can obviously feed a calf a lot better than a beef cow. She produces more milk, so we've got to account for that effect of the recipient. But there is some evidence that ET processes also influence the process of creating embryos will influence the size of the calf at birth as well. So we've got to account for that as well. The conversation then went on to that can end up limiting the contemporary group size. Yes, it certainly can end up limiting the contemporary group size quite a bit, just down to those embryo calves that have been raised on recip cows of similar breed type and age. But it's actually better to limit your contemporary group size than to have non-genetic effects within a contemporary group. So, and the moment you have two animals in a group, you still have comparisons. So, you should be hoping to get at least two of it each in each group, and then you've got comparisons going on. I'm just reading through because a lot of this was in Spanish, and I was Google translating it again. Slice groups. Obviously, if a recip didn't take the embryo and you put a new one into slice groups, we'll end up often putting them into a separate group for analysis because of the time it takes. And slice groups exist for seasonality, to account for seasonal differences in the analysis. And I think that's all that was discussed there.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We had some great questions. We do like getting the questions. We don't always get questions at home. So thank you for the participation.
It's nice to have feedback and interaction.
All right. I'm going to leave the poll open for another couple of minutes, but we will finish up there. So I'll stop the recording. Thank you very much, everyone, for hopping on this evening, your time, and hopefully we'll see you again in a fortnight.